let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We have a
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
46.
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say a
As the
developer
Kubernetes
should-
ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to today's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am your co-host Andrew Sullivan, and I'm joined as always by Mr. Johnny Rickard. Johnny, how are you today?
Good, dude.
Just noticing our names aren't up here. Let's turn that back on so that way people can see who we are.
Yeah. What up, nerds?
Yeah, so it's not Friday, but it's the second best day of the week. It's Wednesday, right? Which
right.
means we get to be here, we get to be on the air, we get to do our stuff, we get to show the people the things and all of that other stuff. So hello. And actually, man, I'm a little behind today. I'm trying to catch up and get my thing organized here. I've been banging away on today's episode. I'm interested to see how this is going to turn out.
It'd be brilliant.
Yeah, we'll see. So hello everyone, welcome to the stream. So today's topic is going to be disaster recovery via an etcd restore. So this is a topic that comes up frequently. I mean, Johnny, you see all the same mailing lists I do. I'd say this comes up a couple of times a month at least.
Yeah, easily.
And kind of what drove me, what pushed me to want to do this on the stream is, so last week I was on PTO. And I had an email come in, and it was from an account team. And basically they were saying, hey, I have several customers who are interested in this, whether or not this is a viable option. Like, is this, can we take advantage of it? Can we use this? And I think anybody who's watched the stream before has heard me talk about this. So, the answer is more or less no. But I've never actually tried. And it's one of those, like, okay, should we put our money, so to speak, should we put our experience where our mouth is? So I'm curious to see what's going to happen today. So just to spoil the surprise here, my plan is basically to take a cluster, create an etcd backup, and then take a different cluster and restore that etcd backup onto it and see what happens. So yeah, and I think we were talking about it just before we started. I think we might actually have a chance of success here.
It's gonna work.
And I say that, and I'll go into more details once we get to the once I start banging away on the keyboard. But like, I say that because, well, it's effectively exactly a clone of the existing cluster, and I'll walk through how I created that. But it's the IPs are the same, the host names are the same, like all this other stuff. I don't think it would work if it were otherwise. So I'm curious to see how this is going to go. But yeah,
it's gonna go so good, man. I've got nothing but faith. Like, I'm so confident right now. Like, it's gonna go brilliantly.
I'm glad you are, because I have no idea. I said before, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, this could succeed, and it could be a relatively painless thing, or it could be an absolute disaster.
But either way, it's a win, right? Because I love, like, especially when I do demos, right? I love it when they go wrong, because then I get to, like, debug and look like a fool, which is awesome. But yeah, it's good for everybody else to see too, and say, okay, here's how I can kind of step myself back and recover, hopefully.
Yeah. What's the worst that happens, right?
Exactly.
What's the worst that happens? So hello everyone, thank you for joining us. So this is one of the office hours live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming, which means that even though we do have a topic, we have something that we talk about with every one of these. Really, we're here for you. Anything you want to chat about, ask about, talk about, feel free to use chat on whatever platform you're watching us on. Reach out, ask those questions. Johnny and I will do our best to answer those. If we don't know the answer, which, let's be honest, happens fairly often, we do know, or we do have a whole pool of folks here at Red Hat that we can reach back to across the business units, engineering, all the different places, product management, etc., in order to find those answers. So don't hesitate to reach out. Kind of, again, doesn't matter what's on your mind.
We're not afraid to ask. So
yeah, it's fun, because I don't know if our Hope 9, he sent me an email a couple of weeks ago, and it was saying, hey, there's this confusion with the documentation and it doesn't make sense. And I forwarded it over to product management, who sent it over to engineering, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a mistake. And so now they're getting the documentation updated, like just simple things like that.
Yeah, open source, baby. That's the way it works.
Yeah. But actually, anybody, I think that one, it wasn't necessarily the documentation is wrong, but more, can you clarify this thing? But
Hmm.
if there is an issue at the docs, anybody can open a bug. It's just on GitHub. I do it all the time.
Yep.
But so yeah. So before we get started, let's quickly talk about a couple of top of mind things. I say quickly get started because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take. So I want to give us some time to be able to figure out what's going to happen before we have to end. And I do have I won't say a hard stop, but a firm I should be done by, I don't know, about 12:30, 12:45 today. So that gives us about an hour and a half.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the clock for you too.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. I need to turn on my screen share here, so that way we can talk about a couple of things. So probably the biggest one that I wanted to bring up, and Johnny, you brought this one up, we told each other about it simultaneously,
Hmm.
is this redirect that's happening with the Kubernetes container registry. So as you can see on the screen here, and let's see, let me post the link here.
I got it. I got it.
Thank you. So as you can see on the screen here, and actually if you just go to kubernetes.io, see, there's this very big, very red. I think when I first landed at the page, I was like, "Wow, when did Kubernetes switch to everything being red?" But no, it's because of this. So there's this very big, very red announcement that hey, the redirect is going in place, and this can have some impact.
Hmm.
So if you don't read anything else, read the TLDR here at the top. Short version is that on Monday they are going to set in place a redirect for k8s.gcr.io, GCR being the Google Container Registry, redirected to registry.k8s.io. So what this means for many folks is that you will need to. Let me restart there. For many folks, this probably won't have an impact unless you are doing things like, and they say here, if you run in a restricted environment, make sure your firewalls and all that other stuff are updated, so that way it's not accidentally blocking access to the new registry location. So what will happen here when this change goes into effect? For things like OpenShift deploys, I don't think anything will happen. Because I think all of the container images that are used for deploying OpenShift come from either registry.redhat.com or quay.io. I say that, there's a KCS. Let's see. Access.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just using the OpenShift stuff will be okay. It's when you start pulling things from like Docker.io or Quay.io from another
Yeah.
registry that might be using like the pause image, because I think that's the one that comes from GCR. That's one I've seen the most, is the pause image, where it's just going through a deployment, it spins that up first.
Yeah, there is a KCS. Yeah, sometimes searching this thing is risky. And I say risky because I don't know what's actually going to pop up. There was at one point there was a KCS. Maybe it's in the docs now. But there's a list of URLs of specific URLs or endpoints that need to be host names. Man, there's the word I was looking for. That you need to have firewall exceptions for. I don't remember if the Kubernetes registry is on there. I know Docker isn't, but I think CloudFront, as well as AWS, several AWS resources are on there. So anyways, I'll see if I can find that link at some point, or Johnny, maybe if you want to dig around in the background.
Yeah, I will. And Linux, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm butchering this. Linux or Ricorio, whatever, made a good point about community operators. So if you're using community operators, right, those don't always necessarily come from registry.redhat.io or Quay.io. So definitely just be aware of that. And I know the Kubernetes article said firewalls, but also if you're doing any kind of like allow or block listing in your proxies, like you definitely want to check it there, because you'll see that with satellite all the time.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, let's see. Let's jump ahead a little bit. So I need to. I'm jumping into a node here so that I have access to one of my OpenShift clusters. Sorry, I can't talk and type. Because I want to do OC get image, I think. Yeah. So OCGet image. So you can see all of these are coming from registry.redhat.com, Quay. I don't see anything in here that isn't either registry.redhat.io, not .com,
Yeah.
or a Quay image. So to me, that makes it seem like if you're deploying OpenShift, you're going to be fine. It's doing container image build, stuff like that. I do think the one that stands out in my mind as being a big maybe is CSI drivers. A lot of the CSI drivers will use the sidecars that come directly from Kubernetes. Get a C. I don't think I have a CSI driver installed on this cluster. But if you're using a CSI driver, and maybe even one of the OpenShift CSI drivers, definitely check on those container images to see where they're coming from. I think they also, if it's a Red Hat one, so if you deploy, on vSphere, and you're using vSphere integrated deployment, I think that those will be fine because I think we pull those down because we do all the testing and validation and we want to control, the versions for support reasons. I think those are fine. But if you use, whatever your storage vendor, NetApp, EMC, Dell, well, Dell and EMC are the same now. Just check on other third-party things because they might be using those upstream sidecars. All right.
And there's something else I need to. I'll talk to you about it offline, but I think that I think registry.redhat.io at the end of April or end of May is redirecting to something else. I think they're sunsetting registry.redhat.io. So that should be something that we should keep an eye on.
I didn't know that, or maybe I just haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, or maybe it's registry.access. It's one of those. I'll find it and send it over to you. But it's something that we need to keep an eye on as well.
Okay. Yeah, or maybe catalog.redhat or something.
It could be it. Yeah.
So, see, the second one was one that you had brought up. I hadn't seen this, so.
Oh yeah. So on if you ever use like O'Reilly books or anything like that, then you probably have seen like the Katacoda tutorials, and so they're sunsetting them, and so there's like I think 25 that are going to be sunsetted at the end of June. So if you use that for training or just kind of like kicking the tires, just know that that's not going to be available after pretty much the middle of summer. But that there's still opportunities for you to learn. So if you go to learn.redhat.com or learn.openshift.com or developers.redhat.com, there's all these tools that are out there that are similar to Katacoda. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Katacoda and some of the stuff that we're doing are very similar. So the experience should be pretty, pretty aligned with what you're used to.
Yeah, I'm going through and launching into one of the ones on. So learn.openshift.com redirects to developers.redhat.com/learn. And they moved from Katacoda over to Instruct. You can see the logo here.
That's right.
Last year sometime, maybe even a little bit before that. But you see, for anybody who's watching, right? You're watching me as I just click through, and I'm just with zero effort. I just got dropped into an OpenShift 4.12 cluster. So is running Shift Local, I think, is what this is running on, or something like that, hosted in AWS. But yeah, it's one of those. I think I've said before. I use these all the time when I used to go to conferences. Of working in a booth and somebody comes up and wants to ask a question or see something, I drop right into these, and they're really good. They're helpful.
Yeah, and there's so many different tutorials out there. Like there's GitOps tutorials, there's service mesh tutorials. There's so many things. If you just want to go and get like a cursory glance at like what we're talking about, that might be a little bit more. I don't want to say basic, but like where we're deep diving into something, right? This might be a little bit more topical, so that we can kind of get just the lay of the land. These tutorials are excellent. Yeah.
So, all right, I'll quit clicking through this thing because it's not relevant right now. But that was
top of mind.
Yeah, that was the only two that I saw on our list. The big one being that redirect. I know in particular if you're doing any builds, if your developers, your app teams are doing any builds, keep an eye on those as well. A lot of times container images will get sourced from just all over the place, something software supply chain, right?
What?
All right. As I started off with at the beginning here, my goal today is to hopefully take this cluster um, and take an etcd backup and then restore this cluster or restore that etcd backup onto a new cluster. So the way my environment is set up today is a little bit strange. So I want to walk through that real quick before we get started. So first, if you look at my URL up here, I'm using a aio.example.com URL. So what's happening in the background here is we have a couple of servers that sit in a data center, actually here in the Raleigh area up in Morrisville. So I've taken one of those servers, which has, I don't remember, 128 gigs of RAM or something like that, and however many CPUs. And I used a Ansible playbook that comes from our former field product management team. So what this does is it deploys an entire OpenShift cluster onto a single physical server using KVM. So all I did was install, I think it was rel, onto that physical node, and then I use this playbook, and it goes in and it deploys a 5-node OpenShift cluster. So if we switch over here, go get node, I have my 5 virtual machines. If I come back up to my physical, so this is my node 37. If I come back up to my physical, I can do a virtual list all, and you can see I have my worker nodes or my cluster members. So here's a worker 3 that hasn't been joined to the cluster, as you can see up here. There's a Bastion node that's running, and then my 3 control plane nodes and the 2 existing worker nodes that are in there. So that's what this GitHub repo does, and I'll post this into the chat here. So that way anybody who wants to take a look at it can. This is a really cool script, by the way. If you have enough resources, and again, you probably want something that has like 128 gigs of memory to be able to deploy everything. But it will go through, it will deploy up to everything that is included in OpenShift Platform Plus. And you can customize, do you want single node OpenShift, compact cluster, full, 5 or 6 node cluster? Do you want to deploy ACM, ACS, ODF, Quay all alongside of it? There's just a ton of stuff that's inside of here. I use this thing frequently. So that's my long and rambling way of saying, so I use this and I effectively did it twice. So the end result is I have node 37 here, but I also have nodes 36. So what was my command? So you can see literally the exact same thing. I ran that exact same playbook just against 2 different hosts, end up with 2 different clusters. I then took one of those clusters and deployed a few things to it. And so that's what we're looking at here. So I have my cluster here. I'm just using a DNS trick in order to get into this cluster using an example.com domain name. Inside of here, I deployed, I deployed 2 applications. One is my Hello Kubernetes application. And if I come down here to routes, we can open that up. You see we have this very simple web application that displays a hello world. And then I also have a separate application that is just my simple deployment type of thing. I don't remember if I created a route for this or not. Oh, I did. There we go. So it just shows me what node it's running on. So I've got 2 applications that are running in here. You also notice that I customize the console here a little bit. So effectively, what I hope will happen is when we restore etcd, it's going to recreate, right? We'll redeploy our applications along with the services and the routes and everything that they use. Note that both of these are non-persistent applications, though. So the expectation here is that for this to work, everything has to be identical. So the hosts, the recovery hosts have to have the same host name. They have to have the same IP address. The storage has to be at the same place because it would do things like recreate the PVs and the PVCs. So those PV definitions that are pointing to a specific, LUN or iSCSI controller or NFS export, or like all of those things have to be the same because it's not making any modifications to it. And I think before we get started here, it's important to point out that this is why I think, and Johnny, I think you probably agree with me, like this is a not a great disaster recovery option, because effectively it has to be exactly the same. Disaster recovery often means that you're recovering to a different site, a secondary site, that is not going to have all of those same things inside of there. Are there ways you can work around that? Yes, absolutely. You can use things, VMware and VXLAN or NSXT in order to create, those private networks and all of this other stuff. And yeah, you can work around that, but that's a pretty big hurdle just getting started right there. And at that point, why wouldn't you just do things like replicate the VMs over and then just turn the VMs back on instead of trying to go this route? But the other side is you're not really saving any time, in my opinion. So what I mean by that is I had to create a whole nother cluster. And that cluster, again, it needed to be exactly identical for me to have any chance of success here. I haven't tried this, so I keep saying chance of success. There may not be. I don't know. So I'm not saving any time because I have to deploy a whole new cluster, and then I'm effectively going to break that cluster to restore etcd and then hope that it just goes through and redeploys everything. And where I'm going with this is I feel like if I'm going to that much effort, wouldn't it be easier to just have a little bit of discipline? I don't know the right word. I don't know, but basically keep track of what you've deployed to the cluster, right? Even if you're not adopting the GitOps philosophy and using Argo CD, at least keep track of your YAMLs somewhere that's protected, so that way you can go in afterwards and, oh no, disaster happened. I've redeployed a cluster. Let me task, some administrator with going in and saying OC apply -F, and basically recreating everything that way, if at worst.
It's just good cluster hygiene, right? Especially nowadays, right? When we start talking about clusters as cattle versus as pets, right? Like you need to know what you're deploying, and when and where and why, and then that way you can even like GitOps, right? Like you can take those YAMLs that you were just talking about, right, and put that in Git, and then just pull that down, and then OC apply the whole directory if you needed to. But just have some type of cluster hygiene where you're keeping track of everything.
Yeah. Tiger asked about persistent volumes. So in this scenario, doing an etcd restore on top of an existing cluster, it would expect them to be exactly the same as they were. So same location, same place, right? You can't change storage arrays. You can't change, the API for your storage array or the iSCSI. Why is the name of the iSCSI target? That's the word I was looking for. Or fiber channel, whatever storage you're using. Like none of that can change. It all has to be exactly the same. In theory, it would recreate the PV, the PVC objects, and everything would work exactly as before. I say recreate. They're not really being recreated. They just always existed. So it through the backup. So it's just going and saying, oh, okay, I just need to stand up the pod because they haven't been scheduled, and then connects everything together. But we'll see what happens.
So in this case, the etcd restore, that's mainly at the cluster level. So it's something like an OADP.
Yeah,
that would be more at the application level, right? Is that kind of like where the line in the sand is?
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah, OADP takes backups or is capable of coordinating backups, I should say, because it doesn't have a data mover
Okay.
of the contents of the PVs or PVCs.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it extracts that data out. So one thing, so I've got a notes document here here next to me that you all can't see, but I have recorded this cluster ID because I don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know, for example, will things like the entitlements automatically transfer over? Will the new cluster, the recovery cluster, take on the cluster ID of the old cluster? I don't know how it's going to treat that, if it will see it as a new, will it come up as the same? Will it show up as a new? Kind of like Windows, Windows, it uses when you do activation of Windows licenses, it uses things like the motherboard serial number and all of these other things to create this unique hardware ID. I don't think we do anything like that, but I also have no idea where this cluster ID comes from, so we'll see. OADP has a data mover now. Oh, that's good to know, Tiger. I assume it's tied to ODF, but I don't know. I'd be curious to learn more about that. We should probably have those folks on sometime, because it's been a while since Annette was on to talk about Ramen and ODFDR. All right. So let's get started. So the first thing I need to do, so this is the cluster that is hosted on node 37. So I point this out because effectively what's going to happen is I'm going to take this etcd backup, and then I want to turn off these virtual machines so that there is no question about which one of the clusters I'm connecting to. And then basically I'm using Etsy hosts on my local, my Mac. So I will redirect all of the connections over to the cluster that is on node 36. And it just uses some IP tables rules to forward everything through. So it's a bit of a, because we're abstracting and accessing what is effectively a natted cluster, everything looks the same, tastes the same, smells the same. It's just a little bit of extra work on my side when I'm accessing those clusters. But yeah. All right. So first, let's get out of node 36 and go back to node 37. And let's go into our Bastion host. So this 123.100. So 123 is the KVM, the internal network for KVM. 100 is our Bastion node. So, and you can see OCP4 Bastion here. OC get node. And then from here, I want to debug into one of my control plane nodes. So we'll wait for it to stand up our debug pod here. Bash. And then from here, I want to create a backup of etcd. So to do that, so switching over to the docs here, we have backing up and restoring etcd on a hosted cluster. Nope, backing up etcd data. This isn't a hosted cluster. So effectively, I'm more or less following the docs that are here. So you change root host. So now I'm going to run this particular command. So I'll literally copy this out and paste it in there. So it's running our etcd backup. If I do home core assets backup, see that I now have our etcd snapshot as well as any static resources that it needs. Note that if you're using etcd encryption, it does extract those encryption keys and stick them into this tar gzipped file. And they are in an unencrypted state at that point. So be sure to protect this data, this backup, in the same way that you would any other sensitive information, if that's what you're using. And it points that out here. If etcd encryption is enabled, it is recommended to store this second file separately from the etcd snapshot for security reasons. So, all right, so we've got our backup here. Now I need to get that backup off of this node. I need to put it somewhere where I can access it externally. So I'm going to attempt to remember the tar command in order to create this. So tar cf, I'm going to create etcd backup.tar from oh, that was like instant.
Oh yeah, it's quick.
All right then. Now let's zip that up. Etcd up. All right, so now I've got my etcd backup. So I want to copy this off. I'm going to put it on my Bastion host. So scp etcd backup to root at into root's home directory. That's I'm sure. Yes, I do. So now I can exit out of my debug pod here. Okay, so I'm back on my Bastion node. And here is my etcd backup. You can see it was created just now. 1531. So now I need to take this and I need to move it over to node 36. So first, let's do node 37. And here, thank you. And then I'm going to then move that. Seems tedious. Like there's a way to automate this. 36.
The process is pretty much the same for Kubernetes too. Like I was putting that in chat where we provide the wrapper script, but like essentially what that script is essentially doing the exact same thing where it's going out and finding all the listeners and then pulling the information from it.
All right. So node 37. So I went into my cluster. I created the etcd backup using the documented backup process that's here. All I did was take those two files, I gzipped them, and then I took that gzip file, and now I have pulled it off of the cluster, and I have staged it for my recovery cluster. So shell list all. Now I don't remember the virtual command to terminate. Destroy.
Destroy shuts it down.
Destroy -4 1.
Hey Andrew, your name tag there is blocking the command, so you probably need to clear your screen or
let's turn it off.
I can't see the button for it.
There, does that help?
Yep, that's much better.
So you see, all I did here was destroy. Thank you for the help. My 3 control plane nodes, and then we'll do the worker nodes as well. And they're all shut off except for the Bastion node, which is fine. And if I come over here and attempt to do a refresh, this should fail miserably. Yeah, it's just sitting here spinning. Eventually it'll come back as not responsive. So my cluster is dead. Disaster has occurred.
Let it ride.
All right. So with that, let's exit out of node 37 and go over to node 36. All right, so node 36, here is our etcd backup. And you can see this one has the time zone set correctly. So therefore, well, I say set correctly. It was set for my time zone. So that's the correct one, right?
Oh, yeah. Red Hat Standard Time.
Yeah. So it was created just a couple minutes ago. So we're good to go there. And now I need to move that into the Bastion node for my recovery cluster. So another scp command. And this is going to look exactly the same because, again, remember, these were created as 100% duplicates of each other. So yes, they're the same once you get inside of the physical node. Just remember that this is now node 30, the cluster on node 36, which is our recovery cluster.
And Andrew, there was a request that once you execute a command, clear the screen so that way it's always at the top.
I'll try and remember to do that, but just poke me if I forget, Johnny.
Okay.
All right, so I'm now on our recovery cluster Bastion node. See, everybody's running. Our cluster is up. You can see this one is also slightly newer because I provisioned it second. And this guy over here is still churning away, so it is not working. I can only assume that if I go here, yeah, see, it doesn't actually respond. All right, so our next step, what I want to do is, again, follow the documentation, but this time it is for restoring to a previous cluster state. So this is documented. I'm going to take this documentation link and post it over here. And effectively, the process that we're going to follow here is to go in, and you can see we connect to our nodes and break etcd. Like we're going to connect into the control plane nodes. So a control plane host that is not the recovery host being one of the chosen control plane nodes. And we're going to stop etcd from running on there. So we do that on 2 of the 3 hosts. So we have 1 node remaining. And then from there, we go in and basically verify API pods, move etcd data to a different location. These are all on the non-recovery hosts. And then from the recovery control plane host, we'll go in and use this cluster restore command. And that will go in and it will restore our backup on top of that 1 etcd node. From there, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a question. It's probably a dumb question, but so when we're essentially killing those 2 other nodes, right? We're trying to stop the quorum, right? That we're trying to stop the cluster communicating.
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah.
point?
So
Okay.
we're just breaking etcd. So we're knocking etcd out of quorum so that we have just the 1 node. And then effectively what happens is, so you can OC get nodes, wait for everybody to come back ready. I think what's going to need to happen here, because this isn't the same cluster, right? It's a different cluster, is I think after this or in between step 7 and 8 here, we're going to have to go and do a bunch of CSR approvals.
Okay.
I think. And, we'll
Makes
see what
sense.
happens. So I think if we can get that done, like if enough stuff on that remaining control plane node keeps running, that we can still access the API, we can approve those CSRs, we can get everybody back to this ready status, then in theory, we can continue on from there. And assuming this documented process works, then we should be okay. But again, that is heavily dependent on the host names and IPs staying the same, from what I understand. So you can see it's saying, restart kubelet, approve CSRs. So apparently that happens anyways, but I think it'll have to happen twice for us. And then I didn't know this before, but there is a process once we get down here. Yeah, restart the OVN Kubernetes pods on all the hosts. I didn't know about that. I'm not sure why that's important, but I guess we'll figure it out. One thing that I'm not going to do is step 12 is deleting the node objects. So we're not actually going to reprovision our control plane nodes. Instead, we're going to go back and effectively let them, because they're already there, they're perfectly fine. So we're going to force the etcd operator to do, and there's a thing down here about it, blah, blah, blah. There's a thing down here that basically forces it to redeploy etcd. And I think that is what will trigger everything to fall back in place. So let's get started. Let's see what happens.
It's going to be amazing. And it makes sense that the IPs would have to be the same, because when you're doing the backup, it's doing the endpoints, and etcd uses the IP at the host name.
Yeah.
So that makes total sense.
All right. So select a control plane host user as a recovery host. I'm just going to use node 0. So we're going to use OCP4-master1 as our recovery host. Establish SSH connectivity. I have that, so I can do SSH core at OCP4-master1. Yes. And I can connect in as the core user. So copy etcd backup directory to the recovery control plane host. Okay. So let's make it here. I need to do an SCP of etcd backup to core. Drop that right in there.
Clear your screen.
Thank you. So all I did there was just an SCP of the etcd backup.tar.gzip onto our recovery control plane node. All right, so that's step 3. Step 4 is stop the static pods on any other control plane nodes. So this time I need to SSH over to second control plane. And then I'm going to execute these commands. So in case anybody wasn't aware of this, so etcd is run as static pods on the control plane nodes. So it's outside, or they start when the node starts as a part of the system D. They don't rely on the other Kubernetes things in order to get started. So let's check and see whether or not our pods are stopped. It says running there. It's broken across the line, but it says running. So if the output of the command should be empty, if it is not empty, wait a few minutes and check again. And there it stopped. Right. The existing Kubernetes API server pod file. So we're going to do the same thing to break the API pod that's running on here. That one's still running, so we'll let that churn for another minute or so, and same thing. And while we're waiting on that, we can go ahead and move our etcd data directory. So API server is on node 2, is in the process of shutting down. So I'm going to trust that that will happen while I go and address node 3. So starting over from the top, this time with node 3, we're going to remove the definition for etcd to be running. We'll wait for that guy to stop. If that's done, we'll do the same thing with the API server pod that's running on here. Impatient.
Come on, little buddy, hurry up.
Got while I'm so as always, don't hesitate to ask questions, make comments, etc. And it doesn't have to be about this either. There we go. All right, etcd is stopped. So now we're going to stop the kube API server, and we will move our etcd data directory. So take this guy, on that guy. All right, let's check node 2. So they all stopped on node 2, so that's good. Need to go back to node 3 and for these to stop.
So Babuni had asked if, and I apologize if I messed your name up, about verse destroy, and does it actually delete the machine? Because it sounds like it's murdering the VM, but actually verse destroy just shuts it down. If you wanted to get rid of the machine completely, you'd use something like verse undefined. And what that does is that takes away the XML for the network device and for all the storage and stuff like that. It'll leave the QCal or the image file in the storage directory unless you essentially pass the flag to do otherwise. But destroy essentially just says force a shutdown right now.
Yeah, there's two, like with all virtualization, there's two of them. There's shut down gracefully, and there's just turn the power off right now. And I think destroy is the latter.
It is. Yeah, it's I'm not playing with you.
Yeah. So it's the equivalent of poking a server in the eye.
Yep, exactly.
Used to call it the one finger salute, right? Right. I don't know why these API servers are taking longer to turn off than they need to, but man, this thing is very diligently trying its best to connect to that node.
Steve asked, have we ever used tools like Trilio Vault that backs up OpenShift? And then he also mentioned that they also back up OpenStack. I personally have not used Trilio Vault, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, I personally haven't. one of the folks on my team is working with a lot of a number of our backup partners and all of that. So we should probably invite him on and kind of go through a number of these things. And of course, if anybody from Trilio or Veeam or any of the others want to come on the stream, we're more than happy to host folks to talk about that stuff as well. But so keep in mind that all of those tools, from what I understand, they focus on the workload, not the cluster. So just like using OADP to, back up not just the data that's inside of the PVC, but also all of the other Kubernetes objects that define our application. So the deployment definitions, services, routes, secrets, config maps, all of those things that make up our application, as well as the data, all get encompassed in those backups. And there's a bunch of different vendors that have stuff now. I think we mentioned Trilio, Veeam, a lot of the storage vendors are now starting to get tools. NetApp has theirs. What's it called? Astra, I think.
Yeah, I think yeah, you're right. It is.
So yeah, and that's in addition to so Veeam has Kasten. So Kasten works with Kubernetes as well as OpenShift. So it does work with. In addition,
Dean. I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
No, you're good. In addition, even if your storage vendor doesn't have like a backup tool, we were talking about this earlier with like GitOps. If you're using GitOps or even just a bash script that goes in and does an oc apply -f, you can still use the native backup tools of your storage array. So I'm provisioning PVCs, they're coming off my storage device, and I'm waiting for all these API server pods to terminate, is what I'm doing here. Oh, they're there. So I'll wrap this up quickly then. So you create the PVC, your storage admin does something on the back end to replicate that volume over to your disaster recovery site. Disaster strikes, they do whatever they need to do to make that volume accessible. And then effectively all you're doing is, maybe modifying the PV definition to point at the new location for that volume. And then you can just redeploy from there. So that gets weird because you realized if you were paying attention there, right, what I said was you're creating PVCs probably using a CSI provisioner on the source array. And then on the destination array, you're recreating those manually. So some storage vendors give you the ability to, for lack of a better term, import volumes underneath their CSI provisioner management. Some don't. So kind of be aware of what's happening there. If that sounds complicated and not like something you want to deal with, use a backup suite, Veeam, Trilio, whatever. And effectively what they do is on the source, they do a true backup. They pull all of that data out, they store it somewhere else. When you go to do the restore, it creates a new PVC and it writes all of that data back into that new PVC, and then everything is doing its thing. I think OADP operator is not a good solution for taking a complete OpenShift backup and restore. To take complete OpenShift resources. Yeah, so OADP is let me think of how to describe this. It is a Red Hat provided vendor neutral method of extracting an application from OpenShift. That's the way that I think of it, or the way that I describe it. So that way it doesn't matter who you are, whether it's Veeam, whether it's Andrew writing a script, whether it's Johnny and his super special backup thing. Basically, it provides one API where you can go in and say, "Give me a backup for this application." It uses Valero underneath the covers, along with some other things, from what I understand. So that way, as a backup vendor, you don't have to worry about quirks. So I'll pick on, for example, I don't think this is true. But I'll use it as an example of like OpenShift doesn't have ingresses, right? We have routes. So let's say that I am a backup vendor that focuses mostly on Kubernetes. So I don't know, or I don't think about a route. So I don't have in my application logic to collect a route. And I would have to go in and have like a special if, then statement in my code to say, if OpenShift, also get the route object. OADP in theory just abstracts all of that. So that way they just say, give me a backup of the application, and it packages everything else. I feel like I'm, one, grossly oversimplifying that, and two, probably making OpenShift sound worse than it is, because again, that was just an example that I used, but I don't think that's reality and how it works. Yeah, deployment configs is another one, Tiger. Thank you. I'm throwing things all over the place.
Yeah, I did that with my mouse earlier. I'm just like, get out of here.
It was funny. So Tech Exchange, we did the keynotes. We're up on stage, and I had a wireless mouse that I was using with me, and I realized when I was in Ireland that I was holding the mouse and talking with my hands at the same time. And like, as I'm on stage, I had this like vision of this mouse flinging out of my hand and hitting somebody in the audience. So the next time we did it, I didn't use the wireless mouse because anyways. All right, we're all done over here. Let's get out of control plane node 3 and go back to our docs. Access to recovery.
And just to
control plane
recap,
nodes.
you just killed the API server and etcd on node 2 and 3, and now we're getting ready to start the restore, right? Okay.
Correct. So now we want to go over to our recovery control plane node, which is node 1. And this one, just to show here, this one should still have both etcd. So there are etcd pods running on here, as well as API server pods running. And the reason why I'm not using this handy little copy thing is because it also copies the $ space. It's slightly annoying.
It's super annoying.
All right, so etcd, API server, both still running on control plane node 1, but not on control plane nodes 2 and 3. So right now, this cluster is very unhappy. So etcd control plane core or etcd quorum has been lost. Effectively, the control plane is inoperable, even though these things are up and running. If this cluster was hosting any workload, basically I have a 5-minute timer by default where the nodes are going to mark themselves as inaccessible. They'll create some taints, and then they'll start evicting workload. So don't do this with a cluster that you like, or that is running other workload. Not only because at the end of this, right, all of that workload would be lost anyways, because the etcd restore is going to overwrite it. All right, so we are now on our recovery plane host. We are not using a cluster-wide proxy. So let's run the restore script. Come on, mouse, quit jumping around on me. So let's copy that, but I need to extract our backup. So here's our backup directory. And we can see inside of there is our static resources and our snapshot. So now I'm going to use the command that we had, our cluster restore.sh. And the second option is the location of that backup directory, so home core backup. But for us, I'm in our home core. Okay. Oops. There, our home core backup. So if we follow along our messages here, so stopping kube API server, stopping kube controller, stopping kube scheduler, stopping etcd, basically it's turning everything off so that it can restore etcd, and it'll turn it all back on. And then it will come up as the new old etcd, API server control plane. So once this process is done, the next step is, there we go. So everybody's back. I'm assuming it's going to take a little bit to finish. So you can see example script output here did its thing. Restore process can cause nodes to enter the not ready state. Yes, I can imagine that. So check to ensure the nodes are in the ready state. Okay, so in order to do that, node.
Can you clear your screen?
So all I did, I exited our control plane node. So here I'm in master. I didn't think those would work in there. So I exited my recovery control plane node 1, back on the Bastion host, and now I want to connect to the API server. And I'm expecting this to take a little bit, right? We just completely like broke everything multiple times over, and API is not responding yet. So effectively at this point, what we're waiting for is the API server to come back. And it's just occurring to me, I don't know how the load balancer for this thing is configured. I'm curious as to how the load balancer is done. Man, I really hope it isn't a... is it an IPI? Is it using Keep Alive D maybe? It shouldn't matter, right?
No, shouldn't.
In theory, Keep Alive D will pull the VIPs over, so that should work.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And the IPs are staying the same, so the backend shouldn't change. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't matter regardless of what you're using.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would think they're probably using like Metal LB or something, right?
No, because Metal OB you can't use for the API or...
Oh yeah, it's running inside. Yeah. Duh.
Let's see.
And Alan just made a point about Veeam has Kasten and Kasten K10 for OpenShift. That's the product for OpenShift. Thanks, Alan.
Let's see here. It has the one IP address on here. Keep Alive D is running. So, see, I might not have thought far enough ahead to make this work.
Marty said, watch out for gratuitous ARP timeouts. The VIPs will still have the Mac of the old interface for a while, which is, yeah, solid point. Thanks, Marty. I don't know if you guys know this, but we're joined by a legend, Marty Jackson. Welcome, Marty. He's on my team, so I get to talk a bunch of crap.
123.10. I have no idea where 123.10 is hosted at.
So if you do like a verse net list, if you, I'm sorry, I don't want to break your train of thought there.
You're good. I'm checking to see how it provisions the clusters. There we go. So it is an IPI cluster. I should have checked that beforehand just to see with the two VIPs. So what we need, or what we're waiting for at this point, is very much to whoever just said that, probably waiting for ARP to adjust itself. And I don't remember how to reset that. But it'll probably also help. And you're getting ready to tell me a command.
Yeah, if you do like verse net list, it'll just show you like what networks are running. The 123 sounds like the default. So
yeah, it is. But I'm waiting for, so I want IP a grep 1 2 3. So basically what we need is we need the VIP to be moved onto this node and create J. No. That's interesting. There we go. With a sudo.
And what's the IP you're looking for?
1.10.
.10.
Yep. Keep alive. So we've got 2 keep alive D. All right, so sudo logs on this pod. So I'm not sure at what point keep alive D, like why it hasn't yet. Oh, I do know why it hasn't, because those other nodes are still up. So what we need to do is force it to move. How can we force it to move? Would be a good way to do that, Johnny.
When you say other nodes, you're talking about the two other masters?
Yeah. So right now we're on master 1, and even though the other two control plane nodes, 2 and 3, even though etcd and API is down on them, the keep alive D doesn't know. So keep alive D hasn't triggered or hasn't figured out that there's an issue. So it's keeping the VIP on one of the other nodes. But the way that it works is it doesn't actually redirect traffic. It's not a true load balancer, right? It just passes it through to the pod that's on the node. So because there's nothing for it to pass it through to, it doesn't see that there's an error or an issue. Because I bet if I were to go to grep 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Marty's saying kill keep alive D on the dead node, so we could either bounce it or just kill the pod, right? Or kill the image container.
I wonder if we can do the same thing. Let me figure out where it's at. Grep 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so it's on node 3 right now. So what I'm thinking is, very much to Marty's point, can we do just like we did with our come all the way back up here. So just like we did with our other pods, there should be a live-D pod. So just like we did with this, we just moved the etcd pod into /tmp. Let's move that one.
I like how you're smart enough to copy and paste, where I'm all about the glory, so I'm going to try and type it out and then fat finger it 15 times. All
right, so that was 3. So let's copy and paste this guy out of 3 and go to 2 and do the same thing. And then CTL, yes, grep, keep live. All right, so in theory, those will stop. And over on 1, it'll say, I need to take ownership of the VIP. Right? That's my theory.
Yes, you took the word right out of my mouth. I was like, theoretically. And Andrew, just a time check. It's just afternoon, just so you have some awareness of where we're at.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so at least one of them is down. So let's exit out and go back to our recovery control plane node 1. And now we want to see.
Keep alive uses VRRP, right? As the protocol?
Yes.
Okay.
It's logs. There we go.
Yep. Good call, Marty. Thank you.
All right, so now we got the IP address over here. So now we should be able to go in OC get node, and hopefully it will respond.
Come on, little buddy.
Come on, control plane. You can do it.
It's just where restarting the OVN pods might come into play, do you think?
I don't think so, because basically what should be happening here is we're connecting. It shouldn't have to leave the surviving the one running control plane node, because it's the only one that has an API server that's running. So it should be going directly to one and then working. So I'm not sure why it's failing here. Let's connect up to
Sudo, yeah.
API server, cert syncer. So it's like the pods are running.
Do you want to see if there's anything in the logs on the API server?
Oops. Went too far over and grabbed the edge of the window. All right, so these are the ones that have bounced. Right, so it's got to be one of these. Cert syncer, insecure, ready Z. What's the other one? And cert regeneration controller. So it's interesting that this API server has not bounced. I don't know if that means anything. There's a way, because there's an OC command on here, but I don't remember where it keeps the kube.
It's like Etsy Kubernetes certificates, I think.
I thought there was a place where it kept the well, there is a kube config there, but yeah, so let's see what happens if I try and connect from here. So it's still trying to connect to this, which should also resolve to the same place. So it should resolve to 10. But I wonder if there is, I mean, I guess I could edit that file and put in specifically like this node's IP address just to force the issue.
So if you do like a ping on that hostname, does it resolve?
On like API?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that's working.
Yeah, you can see it even responds from one. So let's see, what can we do that's more drastic? Let's so sudo create control ps grep API server. So these guys have all bounced, but this one has not. So I'm wondering if we terminate this pod, because that appears to be the API server, right? So if we terminate this pod, what will happen? Alternatively, are there other API servers, just to double check? Shouldn't be. API server. So that one is running. That's interesting. Didn't we terminate those?
Should have, yeah.
Kube API server pod, yeah. Kube API server. Yeah, so those are gone. So I wonder why it left the API server pod running. Strange. All right. let's move the etcd. Okay, cluster-wide proxy. Okay, I'm just reviewing the docs to see if I missed any steps here.
Yeah, that's fair.
So restore process. Run the following command: oc get nodes. Yeah, so we're skipping over a big part here. So this is one of those, like, is the medicine worse than the illness, right?
I love that saying.
all, all of these random trouble things, like, let's clear that.
So, and that's a good point, Andrew, right? I mean, like, you think about it, like, we're going in on this for a while now, right? It takes what, 30 minutes to restore a cluster or to build a new cluster from scratch, and then what, maybe another 10 to OC apply on a directory.
Yeah, I mean, I can see depending on various things, but you have to rebuild the cluster regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that doesn't count. So the question is, whatever's in your cluster, is it faster to go through this process or of restoring etcd to another cluster, or redeploy everything using an OC apply or
Mm-hmm.
Argo CD or whatever your pick your poison for doing that configuration management pieces. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I feel like the time to provision a cluster is a wash because you got to have a cluster regardless.
Right.
All right. I feel like doing something drastic. So let's go to node 2 and reboot. And the dog is very excited about this.
When in doubt, reboot.
Node 3, do the same thing. So, all right. So our two other control plane nodes are now rebooting. Should be able to do OC get node.
Yeah, I wonder if you should bounce this node now that you've done the restore, especially since the API server hasn't kicked off, or maybe just stop and start the pod.
The API server pod.
Yeah.
I think it's worth a shot, right?
I mean, or reboot the master. Yeah. If you're gonna do it, go big.
With cloud infrastructure, GitOps wins. I mean, I feel like even on-prem, right, it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
Because, okay, I've got 100 node bare metal cluster. I have to, it doesn't matter whether I'm, redeploying everything, let's say using GitOps, or restoring etcd on top of it. I still have to have 100 node cluster at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I still have to go through that exercise that, and it is a time consuming thing, right? But I still have to go through that process of, actually restoring or redeploying a cluster. And I started this ping because I assumed that when it reboots, it'll.
Yeah, you won't see it. It's super fast.
Yeah, refuse.
The one thing I do is I'll do like a verse console, and then you can actually watch the reboot.
Does that work?
Yep. So if you do like a verse, yeah.
Shell console.
Then hit enter. So it should be We should at least be watching it go through its boot cycle.
Maybe when it gets there.
Maybe. Hopefully.
So I have I'm using my Mac, which I do most days. It's an M1 Mac. I cannot get the virtual machine manager to work. Because normally, like my laptop, which I use when I'm not sitting at my desk, my laptop is Fedora based, and so I can connect into these hosts, and I can open up a connection or open up the connection with Virtual Machine Manager, and I can actually see the virtual machines and manage them through a GUI and open their console and all that. But I can't with the Mac. It always segfaults, and I've tried through brew every way that I can possibly think of to try and get it to install, and I fail miserably every time.
I'm not a Mr. Fancy Pants like you, so I don't have an M1. I just have the old Intel. So normally, Virt Console, you would just connect in and then hit enter, and then you should be able to see like the console as if you were sitting on the terminal.
Let's get out of that. Let's go back up to our Bastion hosts. Let's see if we can get into. It stopped pinging, so I guess there's that. Ahmed, yes, you're correct. We do need to approve CSRs. The problem is right now we can't. The API isn't responding. So 3 control plane nodes. We broke 2 of them. Probably shouldn't use that finger. We broke 2 of them, and so we have just a single control plane node that is running both the API server and etcd. So this is an IPI cluster, so it uses a VIP for the API endpoint. So the first thing we did was force keep alive D to move the VIP over to our working control plane node. However, we're still not able to connect. OC commands don't connect to the API. Basically, returns back into file error. So at this point, it's one of those, okay, well, we might need to take some more drastic approaches, right? So does API server need to be, the API server pod need to be bounced? So rather than picking those apart, one at a time, I took the arguably nuclear route and just rebooted all 3 control plane nodes. But yeah, as soon as we can access the API, as soon as we can get a response for OC commands, then yes, you're absolutely correct. Then we would want to do, just like we have over here in the documentation, we want to wait for our nodes to come back, and then we will probably have to go in and here OC get CSR, approve our CSRs, because I'm not expecting them to be able to use our nodes. If you need to log into the nodes and remove all of the PEM files, yep, okay, and then restart kubelet and then approve the CSRs. But we can't get to this point. We can't get to this point where the API server is responding on the host that we need it to respond to. Hey, look, it's back.
That took forever.
Yeah, well, I think it was terminating all the services, right?
Mm.
So it took a long time to go down because it was waiting for all the pods to gracefully terminate. I don't know why it took so long, why it was unavailable for so long. It's a virtual machine. I won't worry about that. And now, most likely what's happening is it's restarting all of those pods. Right, so I can get back into our node here. API server stuff is there. etcd is not back yet, maybe. Let me find our command from up here. Yeah, grep etcd. So we'll assume that that'll restart in a minute. On control 2. Okay, so you don't have. All I'm doing here is just looking to see which host ended up with the VIP.
Yep.
I expect that when we've rebooted everything, Keep Alive D will go through another renegotiation and do its thing. So node 1 kept it. So it might take another minute or two. I'm wondering if maybe it's taking a little bit to get all the pods spun back up. Yeah. Not the full set. So we'll let this continue to cook along while it's thinking, while it's doing its thing. If anybody has any questions or any thoughts, comments, concerns, rocks to throw, please aim those at Johnny.
Yes, please do.
Johnny, it's funny because we've got this big list of things that we still want to talk about with 4.12. I saw from our marketing folks they're already collecting blog posts for what's new in 4.13. Like, hey, when is 4.13 going to ship? I feel like we're running behind.
Yeah. There's this. I mean, honestly though, like this quarter, just from January till now, I mean, it's just been insane and busy, right? I mean, traveling a lot, and there's been a lot going on.
Yeah, it's it has been very busy. Like for me, all of January was consumed with Tech Exchange, and then the first half of February was Tech Exchange, and then I had 2 weeks of catching up from the first 6 weeks, and then I was on PTO, and now all of a sudden it's mid-March.
Yeah.
Hey,
It's been
what
crazy.
happened?
Yeah, I totally get it. We did I did Dallas and then Singapore and then came back, and Marty and I and the rest of our team, we had to go, or we flew up to Tyson's to do some stuff, and that was a week, and then all the prep that goes into going and doing a um, work group or workshop.
Yeah.
It's just been time consuming like crazy.
So nodes 2 and 3 here. Let's see, are running hardly anything. That might be an issue. When we rebooted, it cleared out TMP.
Oh snap!
Hopefully we don't need those pod definitions, or we can recreate them. Yeah, it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah, what's the problem? What's worse that could happen? Yeah.
Cluster's already broken. Cuddle PS. Yeah, so things are slowly coming up here, I think. See, they're just fired off Kube API server.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely unhappy right now. Like, make no doubt about it. So we'll just have to wait and hope.
And just so you have a time check, it's 1:20 or 12:23.
Yep. Thank you. All right. So I don't know. I don't know what to sit here and wait for. I don't know what to, aside from just literally letting time pass, so that way these pods can come on and do their thing. Scheduler, cert syncer, ReadyZ. Like, I feel like, I'm looking at this and like I see Kube API server started up here, so I'm wondering if it's starting to bounce around a little bit, so that maybe it's going to be unhappy. Kubeconfig. Yep.
Yeah, he's saying use it from static pod resources instead of like that kubeconfig that's in Etsy Kubernetes.
EXT.
Dun, dun, dun. Sudo, yeah.
Oh, so fine.
Yeah, you want to do sudo su.
just happened? I clicked too many buttons on my mouse. Right. Connection was refused. I'm pretty sure it's because the API server is still bouncing around and not coming up.
Yeah.
Exited. Let's see if we can find Kube API server. Yeah, so it's API server is just angry. But I am curious to know what's in that file that you linked here, Babuni. That was the first time that it actually came back with something. So
Yeah.
usually it was just hanging. Yeah, so the server is the same API. That's interesting. I
So
wonder why.
Ahmed said try the lb-int instead of the external.
Yeah, I'm not expecting it to change anything because the API server just isn't running. Yeah. Confused. So until we can get API server to come up, you can see it failed again. 38 seconds ago.
And that's probably because etcd is not coming up.
CD should be up though. What's the worst that happens if we try and do our restore again? I mean, it's already broken, right? So ready state. So this is what we want. Okay. So, because in theory, it would have had to stop all of those things anyways when it did this process.
Yeah.
So we'll let it try again and see what happens.
So then if it works, right, the theory is that we should have probably kicked over and made sure that we had the VIP on the restore node, right?
Yeah, well, the VIP was there. I don't know why it seemed to not be responding. So I feel like something was wrong with API server before. I don't know what, because now that API server is down, it immediately comes back and says connection refused. Clearly, there's nothing there. But before, it would just hang. And that tells me that API server was there. It just wasn't responding because it was unable to, because it couldn't, like something was broken. I don't know. So when we rebooted it, that basically cemented whatever was broken with it. It clearly is broken enough that now it won't start. It wouldn't fail and terminate before, but now it won't start.
Gotcha.
That's my working theory at the moment, though. And then we just happen to keep the VIP on this node. So my thought now is, okay, let's run the restore process again, because the restore process, among other things, you can see stopping Kube API server and all of this. So it stops everything. We're waiting on the controller manager to stop. So it stops everything and then restores etcd, which etcd shouldn't have changed because it never actually came back up, it seems, or nothing would have happened inside of there. So now it's and then it should restart all of those things. Should, in theory.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Man, I was very hopeful for this. I feel like I don't know. I don't know if Keep Alive D and the VIP being on the wrong host is what threw us through a loop here at first. Like maybe there was something else that might have happened or caused an error where it was trying to communicate and it couldn't. I don't know. So I wonder if that could have affected things. But I feel like we have given it every opportunity to succeed here.
Yeah, to do the
like
right thing.
I feel like we're close, because, and I was thinking about this, as I was getting ready for this, of like, so long as everything is the same, and it even points out in one of these that, yeah, so the restore process can cause nodes to enter the not ready state if the node certificates were updated after the last etcd backup. So it basically accounts for certificates changing.
Mhm.
We do actually, we fix the CSRs down here. So in theory, so long as the cluster is exactly the same, this will work, because it's really not any different than, restoring or going back to a previous version. Apparently Siri is talking. My daughter came up here, they're on track out, and I was hearing something talking. I'm like, she's not talking. No, that's Siri. So I don't know if you could hear Siri yelling at me for something.
Actually, Andrew, what happened is,
Yeah. Let me tell you what was really going on.
It's an Oscar from Office Space, actually. Or not Office Space, but The Office.
Yeah. Oh, why are we taking so long? What's going on? But anyways, yeah, I feel like, again, so long as everything stays the same from the host name and IP address perspective, it should work.
Mm-hmm.
Because etcd isn't magic, nor is it a black box. And so long as we stay within its constraints. I kind of want to connect in and just terminate the pod.
Shoot it right in the face, yeah.
I know you're angry, but come on.
Come on, little buddy, you can do it. I wonder if this just runs forever until you run out of patience,
It's like, when rebooting a Linux server or anything like that, this service is a timeout of unlimited.
Yes.
I hate those. iSCSI, that was always one that got me. Waiting for the LUN to disconnect.
Yeah, I think the big one that I saw that was always like NFS. Like, oh my god, please, why did we do this? Our Hope 9 says etcd is magical, don't make it angry. Yeah, we're learning right now.
What's the command to like terminate immediately?
Like kill, you mean?
Yeah, is there like a Cree control pan? Cree cuddle command that is effectively like a kill 9.
Stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it uses probably the same syntax as like podman, so I think like stop would shut the pod down or the container down. And Andrew, time check, it's 12:35.
Got it in another window over here. There we go. I literally did a stop -T0, Cree cuddle stop -T0, so timeout of 0, and then provided the pod ID.
Do it now.
Kube scheduler to stop. Well, let's do the same thing.
So Ritesh asks, is there a way that we can customize the CoreOS OVA with ignition config and IP details so we can directly provision the VM without any manual intervention with CoreOS OVA for Bootstrap and master?
with ignition config. Yes. But it's not, it doesn't use ignition. It uses, I don't remember the name of it now. Let's go to the docs.
It's like burner. Is it burner?
Burn, that's right. Afterburn is what it uses.
Afterburn.
So in the docs here, if we come down to, where are you? vSphere. So note that it will not work with IPI, because IPI, you can't use static IPs. But if we do with installing a cluster on vSphere with user provisioned, and down here somewhere, I think it's here, installing, nope, that's ignition still, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. So down here, so step 9 underneath the, gosh, our docs are so confusing sometimes. So installing Arcos and starting the bootstrap process. So step 9 under here, it lists out this IP config command. So you'll notice that this is the standard Draycut method of specifying a static IP address. So effectively, we're taking this string, and then down here, the docs show how to do it at the CLI, but you're adding it in as a virtual machine option. So what happens, so I specify my static IP address, the gateway, the net mask, right, all the other stuff that's specified in here. I add that into this guestinfo.afterburn.initrd.network-kargs, blah, blah, blah. I add that value as a virtual machine option. And then when the VM boots, so the OVA, you deploy the OVA into a virtual machine, you add this option. When it boots, it looks for that, and it will use that to set the IP address. So this is effectively, if you've ever done a bare metal or a non-integrated install. So if we go to this installing on any platform, is the same method as if I were to, and we got a lot of this in here. So normally what you would do is if you were booting bare metal non-integrated, you would interrupt the grub boot process and you would append that line to the end and then tell it to continue booting, and it reads that line in. With VMware, we're just inserting it as a, oh, hey, look, it finished. We're just inserting it as a VM option, so that way it can read it in immediately. All right, so this guy finished. Let's see what's going on over here. So starting. So yes. API server is maybe something's running here.
There's etcd. Boom.
Yep. So now we just gotta, I'm assuming we're gonna need to wait for API server to do its thing again. API server. Still refused. Still trying to connect to API ends. So we'll it might need another minute or so for API server to finish coming up now that etcd is up. But it could be also making stuff up. Wouldn't be the first time. So all I'm doing here is just a crecuddle because I'm as root, so I don't need the sudo ps-a and then a grep for API server. It exited 4 minutes ago, so it should restart periodically. Systemd will restart it periodically, so we just wait for it to kick off again. Remember, Johnny, do you know the systemd, systemctl command?
List dash units, I think.
Yeah, I know unit files. Thing comes up. I don't think it considers, well, maybe it does. I don't know if it considers the pods, the static pods, to be a part of that.
So I do list dash units, and then I grep. You can grep for API. I just ran that same command on one of my control plane nodes, and it had stuff.
That's a bad sign then.
Yeah, because it basically returns like varlib, kubelet, and stuff like that.
Yeah, list units, grep API, so grep kube. So, and there are various kube things that pop up here, but it appears that server exited 5 minutes ago. So there's another one. So it just kicked off. It's now running. Oh, that's a good sign. It failed. Dash A, so grep API server. So 37 seconds ago and it failed. Okay.
Yep.
So let's see what your logs have to say. I feel like we're going in circles at this point. Oh, look.
Yep.
Certificate signed by unknown authority. So have we entered a catch-22?
Can you run OC get CSR and get something back? I wouldn't think that you would.
It's not responding. So
Yeah.
the API server, if I'm reading this right, authentication handshake failed. Who's it trying to connect to? Yeah, so it can't start because it can't start so that we can approve the CSRs because it doesn't trust the certificates. So that's interesting. Wasn't there something about that in the docs though? There was something in here. Certificate approve, grep at CD operator. But that's for the nodes that go. Restart kubelet. Where are you? Okay, so OC get nodes W. So SSHN sample pcad directory. So it's saying if they go into the not ready state, we need to log in and remove all of the PIM files from var lib kubelet pki. So again, it's already broken. So what's the worst that happens?
Do it.
So let's remove all of our PIM files. Yep, okay. And then restart kubelet. Okay. Kubelet is running. No files in there, but okay. I really wish I knew how to manually force that pod to start. Oh, kubelet, yep. Connection refused. Yep, I know you're very unhappy because you're the only one. Yeah, I feel like we're in a catch-22 right now.
Yep.
Because it's trying to connect to itself. And it's saying 23, I don't know what 2379 is. I think 2379 is etcd port.
etcd, yeah.
So, yeah, it's saying that it doesn't trust etcd because etcd's certificate changed when we restored the backup over top of it. So the question is, did removing the certificates like we just did, will that cause it to retrust those? Thinking, oh, okay, it just restarted. So let's. Nope. No change.
So now I'm curious, as a science project, right? You blast all the certificates out and then you run the restore again. Does it like, is that a step that we have to do first, right? Let's go kill all the PEM files out and then run it. You know what I mean?
I don't think so. So I'm using this as a crutch here to look at all the logs. I'm not seeing anything where it says it's affecting certificates. And I would assume, we can probably pull apart that static resources and we can see the files that are in there. So let's go to backup. Oops. Backup. So I'm assuming if we were to unpack this guy, yeah, here's our
Mhm.
so that's the problem, right? So time constraints being what they are, I think we can declare this as failed. But if we continued to bang our head on it, we might be able to figure it out by taking these certificates and forcing it to trust them somehow. So I don't know if that means adding these certificates into the system certificate store, or maybe making some sort of modification to the config. Where is that config? The Kube API server. So what happens if we look inside of this guy? Oof. Oh, that's hideous. I'm pretty sure that there is no. Oh, there is a JQ. Wow. I did not expect JQ to be installed on a control plane node.
Yes.
So we could probably figure out in here destination dir static pod, like somewhere in here, we could probably figure out where to drop those certificates in order to force it to trust them. And then if we can get it to do that, then it would start API server and then we can continue with the rest of it. Although we would probably have to do the same thing on the other nodes of replace the etcd certificates and everything. So Kube API server certs. So yeah, that's, I don't know. What do you think? Is that, does that sound reasonable, rational?
It sounds drastic, right? Like this is like, yeah. I mean, I feel like you're on the right track. It's harder than it should be.
Let's see. I'm catching up on messages here. Our hope force. No, it turned out to be a -t. Just in case you're curious. So dash. So cree cuddle stop. So it's literally timeout value -t. If you just set that to 0, it does an immediate. Oops. Add IP. Yep. Okay. Can we restart the cert manager pod? I don't think so. And I say that because we restarted the whole node. So everything should have restarted at that point. And those certificates, because we had already done the backup, so the certificates should be where they were. So when it restarted, it should have picked them up then. It was just we decided to try it with the restore again. And it did start a couple other things, but I don't think that would affect things. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions or thoughts and opinions there. If you don't have, I'm reading Babooni's comment here. Best process if you don't have access to VMware, controller VMware, user OpenShift config. Yeah, using agent-based installation. Yeah. Babooni, I agree with you. Either do an agent installation, which we showed in the last stream, 2 weeks ago, Johnny?
Yep.
Or use the assisted installer, because assisted installer, you still need DHCP, but you can assign static IPs if you need to do it that way. So basically, you boot it to an ISO. It pulls a DHCP address. It then registers, or it says, "Hey, I'm here with the assisted installer service," And then basically you select the nodes and say, oh, I want you to have this IP and you to have this IP. And then it configures static IPs when it actually deploys the cluster. Is Cuddle installed on all nodes by default? Yes, it is. So Creo is the container runtime that we use, and Cuddle is the interface for interacting with Creo-based containers. Assistant installer is not supported. Correct, although you can use ACM's version. So with ACM, they call them infrastructure environments, I think, Johnny?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's something like infrastructure environments. But it's effectively the same exact process. You go in, you say, I want to create a new infrastructure environment and, data center 17. And then you generate your boot ISO and you go and boot your nodes and they join the inventory for that environment. And then you can go in and you can select those nodes and say, I want to deploy a new cluster. I want you to use, this IP, so on and so forth. So you are correct, Babooni, in that assisted installer doesn't work, but there is a assisted, and I think it's literally the same thing, assisted installer. It's just a part of ACM. But that is also where, to your point above, agent-based, if you don't already have or don't intend to use ACM, agent-based installation is the way to go there. All right, I'm going to give up on this. I feel like we are at enough of an impasse, and after over an hour and a half now, while I feel like we could eventually be successful, I think you have to ask yourself, at what point is it not worth the effort? I don't know. I think it's going to be different for everyone. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try this. I would say that you should definitely be on the phone with support while you're doing it, because support may have some processes that I'm just not aware of or haven't figured out or something like that. This is in the docs, it's restoring the same cluster back to a previous version, which can be useful for things, or a previous state, which can be useful for things like a failed upgrade or something like that. But the point is, with those, in theory, things like the etcd certificates haven't changed. There are certificates that rotate, but those are used for communication in other ways. I think the etcd certificates stay the same. I'm sure they rotate periodically. I don't know what that process would be. And again, maybe support has that documented, and I just don't know. Can resolve the node name. Yes, we can test that out here. So I'll say that, but apparently it's not. But it shouldn't matter because it's API.aio.example. Didn't spell that right. So at the API as well as API int both resolved correctly. And I don't know. Yeah. So I think that's fine, but again, it shouldn't. I don't know if that matters or not.
As long as you should be able to dig your like your fully qualified name, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, as long as you have the FQDN, you should be good.
Yeah. Reinstalled the node, and yeah. Although in this case, reinstalling the node wouldn't do us any good because, well, nothing's running. So there is no control plane to run the machine config operator to deploy all those things. So yeah, I have to say I'm a little disappointed. I really thought that this was going to work. So I'm still gonna follow up. I'm gonna chat with a couple of folks on the product management side just to see if they have any thoughts, and I may reach out to a support person or two as well.
Yeah, this is where if Mike was still here, we could reach out to Mike and be like, hey, dude, what do you guys normally see when you guys see this?
Yeah. So, all right, well, yeah, sorry everyone that this didn't work out as well as I had hoped it would. But I deliberately also didn't want to do this beforehand because I wanted to be surprised by the outcome. A lot of times I'll go through things at least once beforehand just to see what's going to happen. But so For anybody who is not watching us live, you can always reach out to Johnny or I, or anybody who is watching us live now. You can always reach out to Johnny and I at any point in time. You can ask us questions, any of that type of stuff. We love getting questions. We love hearing from y'all. So you can reach me very easily at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or at Practical Andrew on Twitter and Kubernetes, Slack, and all of the other places. Reddit. I saw a thing. Apparently Reddit was down for a while yesterday. I don't know. Apparently that's a big deal.
I didn't even notice.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. I got nothing. YouTube I might have noticed, but Reddit, not so much. Or you can reach Johnny at jrocktx1 on all of the socials, or Johnny, JONNY, at redhat.com. Again, we love to hear from y'all, so don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Don't be bashful. Questions, comments, suggestions, requests, especially if there's anything that you want to see or hear about that's going on with OpenShift or Red Hat. We love to talk about those things, and we're happy to bring in any of the product folks that we can get a hold of in order to come on. Who did we just have that wanted to come on, that just agreed to come on?
It was OpenShift for it wasn't Adele, but it was like somebody from Adele's group.
Okay. Oh, it might have been the hosted control planes with OpenShift virtualization folks.
Yes, I believe that's what it was.
Yeah.
Which the pieces, Andrew, you put the puzzle together.
Yeah, they just published a blog post. Here, let me bring back up my window here. So if we go to cloud.redhat.com/blog, yes, thank you, cookies. Containerizing SAP HANA, customize Kubernetes. Here we go. Effortlessly and efficiently provision OpenShift clusters with OpenShift virtualization. So let me drop this into chat. Hopefully we'll have these guys on here soon, but this is hosted control planes with OpenShift virtualization. So on-prem, being able to deploy all of those clusters to take advantage of your physical servers with virtual OpenShift clusters. So lots of cool stuff there. I'm looking forward to getting hands-on with that one too eventually.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's all I got. Trying to think again. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. Johnny, did you happen to drop the link for the Kubernetes Slack in?
I did, and I'll do it again.
Okay. So yeah, Johnny and I both pay attention on there. You're always welcome to reach out to us there, kind of in real time if you would like. And same usernames at Practical Andrew or at JRock on there.
Yep.
With that, we will see everyone next week. I don't know what our topic is next week. We'll figure that out. We got to do some planning coming up so that way we can deconflict with 412 and 413. But yeah, we'll figure out what's coming up next week, and we'll let everybody know. Johnny, last words?
No, thanks for everything. Good to see you again, Andrew, and see you next week.
Yeah. I see Milura. Apologies for butchering names. It's OpenShift on OpenShift virtualization. Yes. So you can do that today using a non-integrated or a platform equals none deployment. You can deploy OpenShift clusters to OpenShift virtualization. The change is with hosted control planes, it will be an integrated deployment. So it'll have a machine API provider and all of that. So you'll be able to take advantage of those things. I say that's not true. There will not be a machine API provider because that's not how hosted control planes work. Hosted control planes work through cluster API. And you can adjust and dynamically modify the cluster members, but it's done through cluster API at the hosting cluster level. Terminology is going to be a beast on that one. There's hosted cluster that is in a hosting cluster. So, all right, y'all. Thanks a bunch. Apologies for stomping all over your last words, Johnny. We'll see you next week.